Hey everyone, so I was going to review a newer movie on streaming, but then I saw they added this one to Hulu and I just had to watch it again because it's been so long. I'm really excited to talk about this one because it's interesting revisiting such a big movie from my childhood. So, let's get into it. Spider-Man is directed by Sam Raimi and stars Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, James Franco, and Willem Dafoe. Spider-Man tells the story of Peter Parker, a nerdy teenager who gains powers after being bitten by a bioengineered spider. He uses his powers to become a hero and save the people he loves. This movie means a lot to me. This was my introduction to Spider-Man. He is my favorite superhero after watching this movie, and I really think this movie had a big influence on my life. I didn't really realize it at the time. I was 5 years old when this first came out, and I've watched it more since, obviously, and I've watched these other movies too. But this one was just really special. I also think it kind of influenced me being a photographer because, Peter Parker's a photographer, and I feel like that definitely had an influence on me now. But again, I didn't realize it. I'm really looking forward to talking about this and talking about what it was like revisiting this movie after so many years. So let's get right into it. One thing I really appreciated about this movie was the action scenes. It was not heavily dependent on CGI. I mean, there was some, but most of it was hand-to-hand combat. Spider-Man and Green Goblin in actual suits fighting hand-to-hand. There was this cartoony punching sound they used that I really appreciated, that really added to the nostalgic cheesiness of it. But I really did appreciate that they didn't focus too much on big action set pieces. I mean, there are some, but a lot of it is more focused hand-to-hand combat. There's moments where Green Goblin and him are fighting in a burning building or an abandoned building. Moments like that I thought were a lot more impactful than just a big CGI mess. Let's talk characters. Peter Parker I thought was done really well here. His journey of finding out what responsibility is and seeing what happens when he makes the wrong choices, especially with Uncle Ben. I thought that part of the storytelling was done really well, and his development is set up really well in this movie, and it really helps set the stage for what's to come in the future movies and in the franchise as a whole. I think Mary Jane was done really well here too. I'll admit, as the franchise went on, I didn't like her as much, and that's not as much because of Kirsten Dunst. It's more about how the character was written and how they made her character as the movie went on, or as the series went on. But I think here she's fine, and I actually sympathize with her a lot more here. She goes through a lot in this movie. I mean, she has an abusive dad, she has a jerk boss, a jerk boyfriend, she gets into multiple disasters in the city. Like, she just did not catch a break in this movie, and I did really feel for her in this one. James Franco did great as Harry Osborn. He did a great job of playing both this rich kid who doesn't want to be seen as the rich kid and tries to hide his wealth, but then also he's really spoiled, and when he doesn't get his way, he acts out. He did a great job of playing both of those, and generally speaking, I think through the performances of these characters, they did really set the stage for where they were going as the franchise went on, but I'll get to that later. Willem Dafoe is still a great Green Goblin. His performance still holds up today. He was chaotic, maniacal, and intelligent too. Like, his performance was a great balance of the crazy and the intelligent. One scene that really stands out to me to this day is him talking in the mirror with himself, the other version of himself. As the scene goes on and they change the angle and tighten up the shot, you almost forget that there's a mirror there, and it's like he's talking to another version of himself standing in the room. And I thought that was such a really interesting way of developing this character. Another thing I really appreciate about Goblin is that he's not a villain that wants to cause a huge amount of destruction. I mean, he does cause destruction in this movie, but he's not trying to destroy the world. He's not trying to do something really huge like the villains that we've seen nowadays. But after a while, his goal was just to mess with Spider-Man. His goal was trolling Spider-Man for the rest of the movie, and he does that consistently, and he starts to go after people that Spider-Man loves. Like, his arc and his relationship with Spider-Man, it's all personal. That's one thing about this movie too, is that everything that's happening feels so much more personal because it's not a big CGI mess. There's not world-ending stakes. It's all very focused. It's just about these characters in the city fighting each other head-to-head. Now, speaking of Goblin too, I think another interesting element that Sam Raimi put in this movie is that Sam Raimi is a horror director, and you can definitely see his horror influence in this movie. There are a lot of jump scares, a lot of moments where Goblin just pops out, goes, ah! Like, there's a lot of horrific elements that he adds into this that I think really elevates this as a superhero movie and not just a regular superhero movie. Like, it stands out because it's not just action, it's not just comedy. There's also these horrific elements that I think really help elevate it. In some cases, this makes sense because when you really think about it, there are moments in this movie that, under normal circumstances, would be really horrific. Like, Green Goblin, when he transforms, he almost dies, and then he comes back. And that scene, Willem Dafoe did a really great job playing off that like seizure thing. That was creepy. And then there's the smile that Willem Dafoe has that's really scary, and it makes him like a really menacing villain, along with the mask. The mask was really well designed, really creepy, especially when you can see his mouth. Well, there's like the goblin mouth, and then there's like a little mesh or something, but you can still see Willem Dafoe's mouth and the way he articulates how he speaks and stuff. That's really creepy, and I think they did a really great job with that. Next thing, music. The music in this movie is iconic. I mean, throughout the whole franchise. Danny Elfman did a great job with the score. The songs are memorable. I still remember the Spider-Man theme to this day. I get hyped when I hear it. All the action scenes were elevated because of this great music. I also have to give a shout out to Chad Kroeger, who did the song Hero for this movie back in the early 2000s. He did a great job with this one. I mean, I know Nickelback gets a lot of hate, but this song, I'll admit, is really good. This was part of an era where they used to make one specific song for a superhero movie, or any movie really, and then the music video would have scenes from the movie in it and stuff. I mean, they kind of do that now, not as much the music videos, but the music. I really just miss that era where they used to go head on with these songs for superhero movies. Eminem did one sort of in that vein for Venom, where it was like very literal, but you really don't get much of that nowadays, and I do kind of miss it. One thing this movie does really well that a lot of movies I think nowadays struggle with is setting up a trilogy, setting up future movies without being too in your face about setting up movies. Ever since the MCU kicked off, a lot of other studios have tried to build their own franchises, and one mistake they keep making is that in their first movie, they focus less on telling a complete story. They just try and shove as much backstory setup into one movie as they can so that they can just push out a whole new franchise, and that just doesn't work. In this movie, I think they did a great job of setting up the characters, the conflict. They do a great job of setting up who Spider-Man is as a character, his morals, his motivation, all that stuff. And they do a great job of setting up his friends too, Mary Jane and Harry. Like, everything I think works. Now, this movie, again, still tells a complete story of how this nerdy kid becomes one of the best superheroes ever, in my opinion, right? And that's a complete story. You get where he started and you get where it ends. But when you look back at this movie after watching the other two, after watching the whole trilogy, you really do see how they really planted the seeds for a lot of interesting things to come in the future. That's something I really appreciate about this movie, and movies that do this, is that it does focus more on the story at hand, not just what's to come later. But they do have time to reference things, to plant the seeds for ideas and conflicts, character development that's going to come later in the franchise. Overall, there is this cheesy element to the movie, which I do appreciate. I do have a soft spot for the cheesiness of certain moments, but overall, a lot of this stuff still holds up. The character development, the music, especially the action, all done really well. Now, there are some things that I think don't totally work for me, and I mean, I don't even think they worked for me back when I was a kid, but one of those things being the love triangle between Peter, Harry, and Mary Jane. I mean, the love stuff to me was always kind of in this trilogy. Like, I think the chemistry was definitely there between Mary Jane and Peter Parker, but there was just a lot of unnecessary drama as the trilogy went on, and it definitely started here. It made a little more sense here. I think Mary Jane and Peter Parker's relationship worked, but the stuff with Harry, to me, did not work as well, and he was ultimately a jerk, and I didn't realize it as much when I was a kid, but they did really set up Harry being a jerk very early in this movie, and it makes a lot more sense for who he becomes as the trilogy goes on. I'm not going to spoil it for you if you don't already know. And then, of course, again, CGI wasn't always perfect. There were definitely some moments where it looked a little cartoony, but I think that's just a result of the time that this movie was made. I can't totally blame them for that. Overall, I would still say a lot of the effects hold up. This movie did a lot for the superhero genre, did a lot for Spider-Man, introduced me to Spider-Man, my favorite superhero. Tobey Maguire really brought his own to this version of Spider-Man. Very unique, very iconic, great action scenes, really great character development, and it did a great job of setting up things for the future without being too in your face about it. So I would say, honestly, this movie still holds up to this day, and you can definitely watch it over and over again and still probably find something new. And if you haven't watched the movie at all, what are you doing? Go watch it. It's still a great movie. Even though this is not the current Spider-Man, it's still really a well-done film, a well-done franchise overall, I would say, overall. And it does really lay the groundwork for a lot of great superhero stuff to come. Actually, watching this now made me realize how far we've come in the superhero genre. I mean, again, this movie is great, but seeing how much we've been able to pull off since, it just makes me so happy to see how far we've come, you know? And as a superhero fan, I'm just really happy to revisit where a lot of great things started in the superhero genre. This era right here where there was like X-Men and Spider-Man, really great time in movies. So I would say that Spider-Man is still solid. This was great talking about this movie that I loved growing up. Let me know if you've seen the movie. I hope you have. What was your favorite scene? Let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.